It's been an interesting fortnight in the media world, not, as you might suspect, just due to an ongoing major football tournament, although I suspect that a large proportion of the country will be spending the late afternoon and early evening in front of the TV, watching to see how England do. One thing that did capture my imagination and thoughts this week has been the hubbub around a new TV channel. That new news channel it's called GB News, was mired in controversy from when it was first announced, but upon launch it quickly found itself being in the middle of a media storm, with advertisers being pressured to withdraw their adverts from the channel. The channel hadn't done anything wrong. Nothing was being transmitted that was in any way illegal, unethical, or in any other way objectionable. So you might ask, why the storm? Well, several brands were persuaded by activist groups that the TV channel might say something objectionable because it was explicitly going to allow many different voices to be heard on the issues of the day. Companies cancelled their patronage because a TV channel might allow somebody to say something that might be disagreeable, not that they actually had. Now, that's called cancel culture. And I've noticed that this is part of a trend and have come to recognise that this is but one of many incidents in the past few years which are troubling and that seem to be contrary to the Christian principles of neighbourly love and forgiveness. And hence I think we should care and speak out. Cancel culture does not permit anyone to come back, does not allow for forgiveness, and this seems fundamentally wrong. The trend manifests itself in numerous ways. You might recall reading or hearing about some of them, such as that of an Oxford college, whether it should be allowed to keep the statue of Cecil Rhodes, one of its major patrons, on the outside of its building, or whether a city centre should retain or remove a statue commemorating Winston Churchill, or quite recently the modest outcry when a student union decided that it was inappropriate to have a portrait of Her Majesty the Queen on display in their dining room. That one was moderately ironic, given that Her Majesty was actually that Oxford College's patron. Never mind. But without exception, it's via social media that the ire of this mob is vested. Now, I'm not personally on Twitter. In fact, I hardly really use social media at all. A Facebook account is the sole engagement that I have, and quite frankly, I use that modestly at best. But I do note that one consequence of social media in certain circumstances is for people to feel that they can express themselves in ways that I simply can't help but suspect they would not do in person. It's much easier to condemn people or events with the mask of anonymity that the internet can provide than it ever would be over a cup of tea or coffee in the certain knowledge that the following day you'll have to meet that same person again and get on. So you might wonder, why do these social media storms matter? Well, whilst they are taking place in an ethereal non-entity of a place, the internet, they do impact the real world, or at least they can. Businesses risk going bust if they fail to properly manage their social media presence, and there are gangs out there, gangs of cyberbullies ready to pounce on the naive or foolish. But what do these events, the statues, the row about advertisers on GB News, the cancellation of lecturers and the like, what do they have all in common? Well, I think I've identified that they are underpinned. They're underpinned by an intolerance of opinions or people that are different, that seem to be out of step to the zeitgeist as others perceive it. And quite frankly, I don't care about cyberbullies ranting at each other online. Let them get on with it, if it stays there. We don't have to listen, and we certainly don't have to engage. But when we begin to allow those same bullies to shape how mainstream media is financed, I think it's time to take notice. If we tolerate intolerance, then we become part of the problem. And whilst the Christ had nothing to say about advertising statues or who gets to lecture others, he did have quite a lot to say about forgiveness and meeting people where they are. The Gospel reading from this past Sunday incorporates two complementary stories. One features a woman who was being shunned by society for her particular form of impurity, so desperate to be cured of her illness, but also to move away from the shunning out of society because of it. She took the desperate measures of coming into the group and creeping up covertly behind the passing Jesus and touching the hem of his robe in the hope that she would be healed. And realizing what had happened, Jesus turned and healed her and forgave her for what she had done. Jesus met her where she was. And the second story is very similar. In this case, it involved a man called Jairus and the death of his daughter. But even this could not make Jairus or his daughter impure. Jesus attended his home and demonstrated the child was merely sleeping, a very understated miracle, which undoubtedly should have alerted everybody present to his true identity. But the point being, for the purposes of my reflection today, is that nobody, not even the dead, were too far removed for the forgiveness and love of God. Nobody was too far removed such that they could not be touched by the divine presence. Nobody was to be cast out. All could be with God if only they held true to their faith. And I think the same is true today. From a Christian perspective, nobody can hold an opinion that merits being cast out. We might strongly disagree with each other. Debate is good. But there is nobody that merits being cancelled or silenced. So I think in the days, weeks and years to come, when we find ourselves being encouraged to condemn or otherwise silence somebody else, to cast somebody else into the wilderness for their perceived ills, I think I should invite all of us to take a pause and suggest that we remember Jesus' example, which is that of love of all creation. Sometimes where education and correction is necessary, to do so, but to do so gently and with love, and never to silence someone else.